me.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Paranormal Palace Radio. This is your host, Royce the Redneck Radio Man. And joining me today is going to be Nigel Kerner. And we're going to be discussing a matter that's been going around through scientific circles recently that, it's got some pretty grave ramifications, and that's transhumanism. And it's going to be about, nanotechnology being installed in humans, consciousness being transferred from humans into mechanical bodies and things of this nature, which I think man's getting a little bit too big for his britches from the sounds of it to me. But we're going to talk to Nigel, and we're going to see what he thinks about all this. Nigel, how you doing today?
Okay, wonderful to hear your voice again after so long. Delightful to be with you from the UK. Of course, as usual, it's cold and dark and not very handsome here. I think you need to introduce John, Dr. John Biggerstaff, who actually is in Tennessee with you there, whilst I'm in the UK, you see. So,
hi, Royce.
Hi, John and Nigel. I want to thank you for doing that introduction for him. I was so flustered with the technical problems I was having getting this show started that I forgot to mention them. So I thank you for that.
You actually never forget, John. He'll always assert himself somehow.
Oh, well, that much is good. Now, John, he's doing a lot of research in this same area, isn't he, Nigel?
He's a very, very old friend of mine, and we've been through this, the grist, so to speak, about this particular subject for near on 30 years now. And of course, we're rather concerned about, the fallout that's coming to us all through technology these days. No one seems to be measuring the consequences of such things. And of course, most important of all, us little old human beings, where are we against this fantastic tirade of diodes and transistors and all the facilities that we seem to face in the day's own troubles, so to speak, Royce, in our modern world and so forth. And taking a look at all of this and trying to extrapolate, trying to understand it as simply as possible, I try to do this, with a view to the children, to younger minds, so to speak, because they are rather, you can imagine, rather confused by all of it. Even though some of them really take to this, I don't think they quite know what the consequences might be if you sit down and stop and think about it. And you made a very good point there, if I may say so, in your introduction when you said that, we really have to see where this is going because it's so confusing to so many people around the world and so forth. So let's see if I can kind of take you and give you my take on all of this for what it's worth, kind of thing, And it really is to do with what we all consider ourselves to be as human beings. What really are we? We are a natural entity, it seems, with an enormous prospectus that most of us never ever get near using completely. Yet, in terms of all the great teachers that came amongst us in the past, if you take their words and their testament to us, they were trying to tell us that we have a magnificence about us, which is really mostly untapped. And they came and tried to give us some clues and some guidance as to how best we use all of this. And they based it all on a very simple premise, and that was that in our natural state, our natural living state, all these propensities, if used properly, can take us into a state of existence beyond this physical world or this planet and this reality into an eternal scale of absolute enormous power and benefit in a sense timelessly. And, of course, that's an incredible notion, isn't it? The idea
it is, and you got to have to ask yourself at what cost does all this come?
Absolutely. Now, the problem is this. If we are this kind of potential as natural beings, what happens if out of those natural beings and their inventiveness, shall we say, artificial things are created that in some kind of way interferes with the potential of this natural scope. And we on this earth know that in 200 odd years, we've developed technology. It's only 200 years old, Royce. It's an amazing report, isn't it? Now, the Wright brothers, took a plane of sorts up in 1903. And since then, we've almost got to the stars, so to speak, way past our own solar system and so on, with the most immense technological expertise. And that's just about 200 years, shall we say, give or take a few.
Which is really astonishing given our history.
Yeah, it's an absolutely incredible proposition, isn't it, really, basically, if you think about that. Well, can you imagine, with all those trillions of worlds out there, I don't really think we can assume we're the only ones in this universe anymore. In fact, science is now proving that is probably zero likely now. And so there must be civilizations that go on for thousands and thousands of years of development and so on. So what kind of development would they be? And could that development actually interfere with us in our little old planet here we call the Earth and so forth? And, of course, when you look at these things and you put them in their place and you try and study this, without prejudice, look at it nominally, look at it objectively, you have a picture that builds which can be extremely worrying, in fact. And we know now how, day by day, our little humanity seems to get smaller and smaller against the inventions we make and the scope of living we all have to endure, if you see what I'm trying to say. And yes. Many people around the world are confused now, particularly the older generation that knew things a little bit more comfortably, if you see what I'm trying to say. I'm always reminded by the lovely old American films, It's a Wonderful Life and The Light of the Silvery Moon and all that kind of thing, those lovely folksy old things that we all love so much.
Things that
we get them in England, and then, of course, America has been taken as a kind of icon of pleasant life, if you see what I'm trying to say. However, when you get this business of technology now interfering with every single moment we live, and the capacity of this technology to actually interfere with our will, our free will, in so many ways and so easily, we have to ask the question about controls. What controls all this? Who will control it? If we individually and our free will can't say no and make it mean no, and we have to go to other dictates and scopes, shall we say, what about the future generation, the children being born now? What is going to be their legacy? And so as a father, and I try and look at this in the books I write and the things I do, I try and always look at it in terms of the children, my grandchildren and so on, and try to see when I have gone off wherever I might go, what am I leaving them as a father kind of thing, and looking at it in a very, very, if you like, a nominal and normal way of seeing things. And I have to say that I have been disturbed in the 30 or 40 years of research that I've been doing, bearing in mind all the things I've said previously, that I don't think that the legacy I shall be leaving them is something comfortable. It's not going to be by the light of the silvery moon or on Moonlight Bay or A Wonderful Life. I hope that is not so. But if I'm going to be strictly logical about things, then I have to say that this is a very, very worrying prescription for the future. It's looking more and more, it's looking more and more possible to create, if you like, an electronic database, an amount of information, that's what a database is, containing all information, biological, in other words, how you move your hands and your feet or whatever, with the naturalness of your body, and psychological, the way one thinks of an individual human being that can be used to reconstruct that individual after the original model has gone. In other words, we can actually take the essence of makes us all these things and electronically store that, manufacture that, and some scientists and some great minds, we're not talking hick scientists or these strange, way out types. We're talking about very, very clever people. And they're saying to us that, in fact, we can take all that makes us human, and that all comes down to what they call a continuity pattern. And that's all we are. Well, I think that is cow droppings. You see what I'm trying to say? I'm deliberately trying not to be rude by using the word that we use.
Sound like to me like you're calling it like it is.
It's really absolute rubbish. It's garbage. Human beings are immensely greater and bigger than just the electronic patterns that manifest when we are working. And science thinks that they can capture this, put it into an artificial environment, and we will be the same Royce and the same Nigel and whoever, right, as we are, as we talk now over the microphones and so on. So the point is that there is something really scary coming up here that we all have got to look at. And the most scary thing of all is that this is given such scant attention in the mainstream information services of the world. And if I'm going to pay you a compliment now, Royce, I have to say this because I really sincerely feel this. It's guys like you heroically trying to get this stuff out there in these places, broadcast situations and so on, that are actually making people think deeper and further than those mainstream things like the press, the printed media, the light media, the television media, whatever, where these things are never really looked at. They have little addendums, little articles here, there, and everywhere, but they never take the consequences, the negative consequences that are so apparent, and actually discuss them in the mainstream.
Right.
And that is the most scary thing of all. It seems like there is a huge conspiracy here with a very powerful number of people sitting in the background, making sure that we go on all the frivolous nonsense and never really attend to what is extremely important for each and every human being on this earth to consider in terms of that human being's future. And 2,000 years ago, an amazing individual, and I have to say I'm not a religious person here, I really am not. However, I have heroes, and amongst the heroes I count the founders of the great religions, not what has been made of those great religions by cartels and organizations. They have completely emaciated all of them till they're a extrapolation of lies, mostly. But
yes.
If you take the pure words of these beautiful beings and the pure examples of these lovely beings, particularly one, I think I feel a bit able to talk more about, shall we say, the Judaic teacher,
right.
The person we call Jesus Christ, okay? Because, I have to say that as a child, somebody sprinkled some water on me and called me a Roman Catholic. But, I have to say
didn't make you one.
You're absolutely right, Jack. And that's the whole point about it, that we have to take lessons in terms of learning and teachings and so on, and not cast ourselves as players in someone else's soiree, someone else's collective organization, if you see what I'm trying to say. And going back now to connect up what I was saying, I hope I'm not digressing, but the point I want to make is that this individual, in what he achieved today, has given us a proof that is so sensational, that is so mind-blowing. It exists as a piece of cloth, which is held in a place in Italy called Turin Cathedral. And on that piece of cloth is an image of a man, a life-size image of a man, burnt into the surface fibers of that piece of cloth. And the most amazing thing, it's called the Shroud of Turin. I'm sure your listeners, a lot of them may be familiar with this idea.
I would hope they are.
I've been researching this for many, many years, and I have some very distinguished company with scientists who've dedicated their lives to actually understanding this phenomenon. And the most recent report on the verity of this thing, which has been called a fake. Some people have said that it's a medieval forgery. Well, the latest information on that is that it is the last thing it is that it's a medieval forgery. In fact, it is not a painting, but an amazing phenomenon where the image itself has in its own terms of reference, coded within that flat two-dimensional surface of a piece of linen, three-dimensional information. And a whole host of some of the world's finest scientists got together under atomic energy types of commissions and so forth, and tried their best to duplicate what has happened on this piece of cloth. And do you know, they have discovered that nothing exists on the face of our globe with all the sophisticated science they've got to come near to actually doing that. So what actually happened in that Judean tomb about 2,000 years ago, when a dead body, ostensibly, and according to this, the evidence on this piece of cloth, actually came to life with a blast of energy, a flash so powerful that you could say schematically that that power was the concentration of an atomic blast per tiny point, each tiny point on that piece of cloth. And I'll read you one of the conclusions, if I may. And this is pertinent to my previous statement to you about what might happen to our species and so on, with 2012 coming and all that business. I'll just read you the conclusion here. It says, the ANER, that's the organization, is called the National Agency for New Technologies, and it's an Italian thing where the top Italian atomic scientists got together and tried to see what in fact this particular thing was. What was it? Let's come to a conclusion, was their basis for the investigation. And these scientists say this. They say that it would take the equivalent of 34,000 billion watts of energy to make that impression on a piece of cloth human size. And this is the most amazing thing. There is no machine in existence on this planet at the moment that could actually do that. Now,
much less 500 years ago.
2,000 years ago, Royce. That's the amazing. So if the property of a living being, as Jesus was, could, from his dead atoms, generate something of this order, and if, of course, it is said that he came alive, he came back from the dead. Well, I'll tell you what, just simply on the science of this, I'm absolutely convinced that he did. Now, he also made an incredible statement about us. He said, there's a record of this in the Gospels, "Don't ye know ye are gods? What I do this day, today, you will do in the future." If we as human beings have a potential and a capacity, conditionally, if we do it the way he tried to show us how, shall we say, that we can do that of ourselves, well, I'll tell you what, I do not fear any robot or roboid or any extraterrestrial that comes to this planet, providing we can actually save our human family to get to that potential. And that's really what drives me. Here in this provable thing, that they call the Shroud of Turin, is a expression of the power and the glory of a simple, single human being. And that, you see, is what I'm talking about. If they want to take that and make it into some mechanized thing with electronics, so to speak, put our consciousnesses in little boxes or whatever they might say, so that we get some kind of future. It is totally and utterly ludicrous. So why are they doing it? What is altering mankind to think it can do that when a man 2,000 years ago said, you don't have to do all of that, just follow my example and it'll happen to you. And if he says that he went beyond life into death, and he told us there's a wonder waiting for us there, I go before you to prepare the way for you, blah, blah, blah. I don't want to quote the Bible. I'm not that good because I don't quite know it as accurately as many Americans would, shall we say. But as a scientist, I have had to look at this and take stock of all of that. But I tell you what, now that's a proposition that we all should be absolutely delighted, because we've got verifiable proof of it here and now. And that's really what I want to talk about, that whatever comes in 2012, by the way, I do not believe it's going to be some catastrophe that's going to wipe us off the face of the earth, but it might well be some kind of technology that might come either generated by mankind as it's going, or from out there in space, where machines that we build might come and change our naturalness for their own purposes. And that would be extremely disturbing, to say the least, would it not? I'm sorry, I don't know. It's a bit of a monologue, that, and I do apologize for going at a reach on that. But, I mean, Dr. Biggerstaff is an eminent biochemist and works at the University of Tennessee, so he too has a take on this, I'm sure.
Oh, I'm quite sure he does. As a matter of fact, I read his website or a page about him, and it seems like he actually, has done some study in this here area more in depth than probably you or me have. But I got to tell you, it's, there's a lot of questions out there that haven't been answered about this, as you were saying a minute ago. For one thing, if they were to say, for example, find some way, as dubious as it is, to move a human consciousness into an artificial body and make it work, would you have the same taste, the same feel? Would you have the same pleasure in life that you have now, or would you get robbed of it? And then what does this, and is there a program already in place through reincarnation? Isn't that where when people pass beyond, they leave the body they're in, and when they come back, they're in a new body, but it's a natural body? And wouldn't that be a better setup than the artificial setup?
You're absolutely right. And, of course, that simple, logical sequence of events you quote there has more wisdom in it than anyone who's got 10,000 PhDs attached to their names. Let me tell you that. And that is absolutely right. That simple analysis you've just given. Do you know, it's very simple to try to see what we might be. I think I don't really want to continue talking too much, because I'd like John to, perhaps you might like to invite John for his take on this before I go on.
Yeah, I was just fixing to do that.
And another lick, maybe he should come in and give us his take on the Shroud or that kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, Royce, that last statement of yours was really, really hit the sort of major point of the whole thing. And really, science has been sort of happily working towards doing things like you've just said, so that when we die, our consciousness can be transferred to some sort of global network, etc. The problem is that it really doesn't understand what consciousness is. Science is really, really slow in attempting to do this. And scientists, there are some of us that are really beginning to ask the question, well, what is this consciousness thing, and really how does it interact? But I think your point, that consciousness itself is really, within a universe, is really just part of the whole system, but it's a part which is independent from atoms themselves. And so, as you mentioned, reincarnation, this consciousness, when you die, it can actually detach itself and then reorient itself, based on what it's experienced, and actually continue on its path into another life. Now, when you actually put a bunch of atoms together to make a vacuum cleaner or a computer, or in fact nowadays, a lot of my colleagues and those around the world are trying to make, the equivalent of us. What is artificial intelligence? If we actually program code into something, The problem with this is that the atoms themselves really don't have that connection outside of themselves, such as our consciousness does. And therefore, they're really just machines. They are not capable of really being aware of what they are. They can only respond to what they've been programmed to do by a living thing. And, you know, this has been the really big confusion. So my belief really, and I think yours too from what you said, is that no matter how much complex machinery you put in there, the thing really has no connection back to an origin, and therefore it has no awareness of its own being in its own right. It's just a responding machine, however complex you make the thing. Now, the big problem is that, you know, we can be persuaded really to try and interact with what we've created, the technology that we are creating. Not only is it beginning to change us, you know, in sort of bioelectric ways, but in fact, by using our own wills to accept such technologies, a recent article on BBC News Health on the 15th of November, you know, is really showing that part of our response is that, you know, computers, gamers, brains differ. You know, the pleasure centers in our brains are actually changing their size, etc. And we know that the brain is an incredibly adaptable thing in its own right. You know, if for instance, you know, we've been damaged in some way in an accident and we really can't function, the brain can actually reroute or reroute, as Nigel would say, to other centers of the brain and actually reconstruct those circuits. And I think that in response to anything, in terms of our experience, we begin to reconstruct, to adapt to that or against such a thing. You know, and things like computer gamers. Also in psychology, it's been noted that really people in terms of education are really beginning to delocalize their information base. Whereas, you know, older folks like me and Nigel and perhaps yourself, you know, in the earlier days when we didn't have such technologies, we used to be able to, we were taught really to absorb facts into our minds, for instance. But nowadays, when you teach people, and in fact, when I teach people in my laboratories, excuse me, they have to resort to a calculator to do simple arithmetic. They have to resort to the computer to dilute one thing into another. So, and therefore, they are aware then, you know, people are becoming more aware of the dissemination of information, and rather they have placeholders for the location of that information elsewhere, such as the internet. Now, this is all well and good, provided one still can make that free choice to be able to do such a thing. But we're really moving into an age now where this technology, you know, some of my colleagues and people around the world are really trying to understand how the nerves in your body actually work in terms of the electrical signals they're giving off, and they're trying to interface those signals with electronic devices such that we can actually put electronic devices in our bodies. Now, this can have a really good effect in one way, and of course this is what people are purporting as really the future of this. You know, for instance, experiments have been done where they actually take small chips, for instance, which have got a little array, a little grid work on them, and they actually put them on the back of people's brains that are blind. And they've got a little sensory detector at the front of the head, and this detector has got the similar array, and so when it recognizes light or dark, it will fire off different patterns on this grid on the back of the brain. And strangely enough, the optic sensors can actually pick this up and translate it into little flashes of light that person can actually understand. And they're making these arrays bigger and bigger and bigger so that people are eventually being able to pseudo-see through what these arrays are telling them. Now, of course, these arrays are pretty small at the moment, but people are miniaturizing and increasing this constantly. So effectively, you're going to have the equivalent of a camera in the back of your head. And once you get to that point and you actually understand the signals that neurons are giving off, and you can actually translate them, not only can you translate what's being said by a brain, if you like, but you can actually put signals back in the same way. Now, that's where it really gets confusing, because the individual, the poor individual who's trying to interact with this electronic system doesn't know whether that electronic system is what they're really thinking, whether that electronic system is actually providing them with the thoughts that they're thinking or the emotions that they're feeling. And therefore you end up with a big confusion, which really ends up with a delocalization of your humanity. And if, coming back to Nigel's allusion to Jesus and the shroud, if that man was right and he says that all you've got to do is follow the pattern that I've followed, you know, if you've got a bunch of electronics in you telling you all sorts of rubbish and buy this and buy that, and I feel like I need a Coca-Cola or whatever it is, you're never going to get to the place where you can actually think clearly enough and to know that it's your own thought to be able to actually get out of that system. And so you become trapped within it. And becoming trapped within it, you now no longer have the information that when you die, to be able to reassimilate that into such a way that you can actually make any progress, because your system is entirely confused. And so I think, you know, whereas naively scientists move ahead trying to make better technologies all of the time as best they can, I think what's really happening here is beginning to scare a number of scientists, and among them myself. And really, this is part of my reason to get included in discussions like this, because I think we really need to make people aware of the potential dangers of such technologies.
Yeah,
Sorry to come on for
so many times people I talk to, they only look at the surface and the benefits, and then they don't see through the rest of the story. And if they have a chance to hear a show like this, they can get the rest of the story they're not catching right at first.
Absolutely, but I'm very grateful that you allow us to discuss such things with you.
Oh, I'm grateful to have you come on the air and talk about it, because this is some, in my opinion, very important information that I think everybody needs to be aware of. But I also wanted to mention that we got a lady in the chat room, Jennifer, and she wants to know if you guys think the chips can be used, for, say, bad people's advantage, such as the NWO.
Well, I mean, I'm not sure I got the question right. Can you just repeat that again, please?
Okay, well, she was wondering if the chips that,
the chips.
The chips he was describing, that they can implant in you, the neurochips.
Oh, right.
If they could be used for, governmental advantagements, like, say, the NWO.
No. There's no question about that. I mean, they can put things, as smaller than a full stop on a printed page. They can get them so small now, and they've got things like nanotechnology. Royce, I really don't want to scare people by saying this, but it has to be said, because these things are there, they are true, they are being developed. You could give this into the bloodstream of someone, and you can get these things to anchor in there. And if you can get them into the brain connections or whatever, they themselves can be used to dictate patterns of electric charge that will stop you thinking your own thoughts, that will give you no sense of your own identity as you. Can you imagine this? And
more or less turn you into a robot.
It's a really scary thing, which I tell you is now happening in laboratories around the world.
Essentially, that nanotechnology is really the sort of so-called way forward in science, rather than putting chips, as I was talking about, into your head. If you come up with these sort of nanotechnologies, you can have them pre-programmed, on a molecular level, to actually go in and go to particular places in the body and actually then start to influence those fields.
Absolutely. Now, can you imagine this in the hands of some dictator, someone
like Hitler?
Whatever, someone who has no sense of the family of man or a sense of goodwill, except a belief in his own power. And we know, don't we, that there are so many of them around the world. Many rulers these days seem to be stem and branch this kind of thinkability. Synthetic biology is what this is all about. It's called synthetic biology. We create it. It's not natural. We are natural. We come from mum and dad, granddad, grandpa, and so on, going all the way back to the beginning of the universe, Royce. Amazing thought that we are, in fact, the end of billions of years of this kind of process. And we are naturally formed through birth. And we are, hopefully, as we are born, inculcated in love and caring and emotions, and we have a way of sensing things and feeling things and so on. Well, atoms are extremely objective things. When you make nanotechnology, which is tiny atomic arrangements, the atoms themselves are made of charges of force, if you see what I'm trying to say. And the charges of force don't have a thing. There's no quark called feeling. A quark is something that makes up an atomic, an atom, if you like. And so these senses we have of feelings, this wonderful ability to imagine an entire universe, its scale, to appreciate a beautiful scene. I mean, you know the kinds of things we human beings do. I don't want to wax lyrical about this, but I'm sure your listeners realize what I'm saying. Now, they're saying now, and these are experts in the field, they say that synthetic biology will lead to new forms of bioterrorism. Biocrime today is akin to computer crime in the early 80s. And this is going to go on and on and on. And I tell you what, they will sell us this bill of goods in terms of it being good for us. It'll cure this thing that's wrong with you and that thing that's wrong with you. It might well do that if we have men of goodwill in charge, if we all are kindly to one another. But have you looked at the history of mankind? Well, take a look at the history of mankind. Have we been
Look at every good thing they ever started and what it turned into.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you look around and you just judge from our historical perspective, I tell you, there's no way that we can see that we will not dominate anything that is inferior to us. In fact, the rule is, if you are superior to something, you will dominate that which is inferior to you. And I think that if you get these things coming from space that have developed for thousands of years of technology, and they are robots, shall we say, like we send robots now into space to do the kind of, investigation into asteroids or whatever, in our relatively primitive way. Imagine an intelligence that is far superior to us, sending mechanisms like this to our Earth and looking at us, seeing what we are. And the fact that they can come here with those vast distances implies they have stupendous technologies. Well, what are they going to do to us? They're going to look with curiosity on us. We might have something, by the way, that a machine doesn't know about. A machine can't know its own identity, doesn't know what I is, if you see what I'm trying to say. Doesn't have a sense of its own identity. Well,
no self-awareness.
It will see that we have this, and they may want to do something that is really disturbing, and that is to hack into us in some kind of way so that they can then dominate each of us to their own purposes or their program. Now, it's very simple to understand this process. I try and explain it to my children as simply as I can by giving them this model. You have a mobile phone. You make a message on the mobile phone that says, I will meet you in this particular place at such and such a time. Now, that, shall we say, is a unique message that you have just thought up in your head, printed it out on the face of your mobile phone, you press a button, and that information that you just created goes across empty space and time, so to speak, to another mobile phone, to the person you're talking to, and that appears on his mobile phone. So a parcel of information goes across empty space and time, so to speak. It's invisible. You don't know, you can't see it. You don't know it's there. Billions of these things are doing it all the time from one mobile phone to another. It's actually something going from one place to another that you can't see, yet it's doing it. Now, let's suppose that we as human beings are just billions of years of special unique information. In other words, your information that makes you, your shape and what you are, by all the messages you have sent and all the things that you have seen makes you unique. That's why you look different from someone else, shall we say. That information ball, I do apologize. I don't mean you are a ball. I'm just using a metaphor. I'm using a metaphor here. Please, I must point this out, Ralph, in case people think you're a ball. And I suppose you might have a ball, but I will tell you that this bit of information we call a human being, this parcel we call our individuality, is very much like that message on a mobile phone. It's just simply information that makes us different. And when we die, when our physicality ceases, it ceases because we generate a magnetic field that holds this electronic information in one spot, meaning us. And that electromagnetic field is caused by a heart, a pump, pumping a liquid with hemoglobin, which is iron, rather like the information, on a tape recorder, you get an iron oxide, you put information, electronic information on that, and the tape heads, the transducers, read that, and then retranslate that, and you get music or message or whatever. Well, right. We are a living biological transducer. And when our heart stops beating, the magnetic field that holds all that information in one spot ceases. It stops. And that information still there, just as the mobile phone will be there, a message will be there forever. Every message is going out into space now. Every message that's ever been made is going out there into space now. Millions of miles out there at the speed of light. The same way our information is retained uniquely as a specially shaped field called Nigel or John or whatever, and this goes on, and that information can never be destroyed. To me, that is a soul, that special information that makes us uniquely special. And I think that then has a resting place amongst the power of atoms, the force of atoms. And if you ask me where that might be, I will simply say between the spaces between atoms, where there is no force, the centers of which have no force. And that information, logged the way it is, me, my identity, your identity, whoever's identity, goes and persists there until an instigation occurs for that information to be inculcated into a new system where it can go and take in, i.e. the zygote in a woman's womb, and a new life starts. So you then start to continue on, and that could quite easily explain to me what reincarnation might be, that we carry on. We just don't end at death. It is not possible rationally to do that in terms of what science is now discovering about the deployment of force and what they call no force. And so, you see, to me, there's a very easy way to understand all of this without appearing to the mystical and the obscure and so on. It's a very, very simple thing for me. And when I explain this to children in this way, you see their eyes light up. They can see it. And you know what? They take that further. The surprising thing is they seem at that young age to know more about what might happen and how that might be. And some of the ideas I get when I speak to children absolutely blast my head open as to how much instinctively a young mind knows about such a concept or such a metaphor, if you see what I'm trying to say. So I think there is a real, not just a possibility, I think there is a reality to this myself after looking at this for so many years. And it's not wishful thinking. I think that's what Jesus was trying to say to us and all the great teachers. We continue. We never end. And the better we dispose that individuality, the more we fit into better places. And that, I think, is what sin is all about. It's quite simply restriction. If we're restricted, if we're ignorant, then we are sinful. It's not some dirty thing, some awful thing that you are, whatever. Just, Jesus said it, change your mind. The word repent just simply means, when you translate it from the Aramaic that Jesus spoke, to the Greek, it was translated as the word metanoete. If you look at the Greek word metanoete, it simply means change your mind. And Jesus simply said that. If you're ignorant and you don't understand something, change your mind, make it logical and rational, and you will have the truth. However, that was hijacked by power people who wanted to live a long time in monasteries or whatever, and they said, unless we tell you how to do this, or we allow you through making some shape in the atmosphere of a cross or whatever, you go nowhere. And for their own reasons, they changed the word repent to mean be sorry, have penance, do this, do that, because that means you are conditional on their power and their allowance. But human beings are inherently independent, I believe. And this is the lesson that science has taught me. I didn't come at this through religion. I came at it through being interested in science and all the things that science gives you. Science gives you a logical, objective way of looking at something, an unprejudiced way. I can't say that all scientists are unprejudiced, because like the old religious people, they too get their own affectations and their vanities, as we all know. But that's the problem. We corrupt as we go along. And the pure stuff of truth seems to get lost along the way, and that's the problem. And that's why I write the books I do. It's a discursive. It's an offer. Hang on, take me on, tell me, is there an alternative? And I'm learning not to be sinful by understanding and making things work logically, if you see what I'm trying to say. So if you get planets out there under the same auspice as our planet is, you're bound to get mistakes magnified even more if their technology is greater. And if they come and tell us what to do because they've got power of technology over us, we are in big trouble. And if 2012 is supposed to announce, as some people think, the arrival of some of these kinds of things, in advance of whom our planet is being made ready through the deployments of technologies as we see, mobile phones, whatever, where each individual can be looked at, can be identified, can be investigated, can be seen, we have a horror story to come that we've got to expose as ordinary people all around the world and get somehow on that mainstream and shout at the top of our voices, no, you're not going to do that to us. After all, a machine, like a robot, is just a glorified vacuum cleaner of sorts. It has no feeling. And we've got to realize that. It will take, we can construct it, we can alter its program, we can stop the rascals if we know that it's the machine and we know how it relates from its synthetic nature into our natural nature. So everything that is natural is superior and more powerful inherently than anything that is made up or synthetic along the way, so to speak. And we come along from a long way back, billions of years, right from the beginning of the universe. And that implies that we are also connected to what might have been before the beginning of the universe. If we come from that point, we would be allied to what might have caused that to happen as well. So we are ancient and we are mighty because we are ancient.
Right. And most people, I think, don't even realize how ancient they are. But while you were speaking just now, the thought occurred to me about what's the actual potential, do you think, in your opinion, that at some point in the future, the hospitals might mandatorily start trying some of these implants on babies without the parents' knowledge, like when the parents are at home or in their room and the baby's separated and nobody knows what's going on when there's no watchman, in other words?
Yeah, well,
I'm sorry.
Sorry, John, can I just quickly say this? It's my opinion. If you want my declaration on this, I would tell you that I would be absolutely paranoid about going into a hospital the more technology takes over hospitals. Because I tell you what, it's not going, it's not going to just be the politics of what is necessary for the saving of lives and the relief of pain. It would be the politicians somehow getting in on that act too. And if that happens, then what you propose and what you are saying, I believe in terms of my own custody of my children, I believe that is a very, very strong possibility.
Which is, again, a write-off for our future and our children's future. And that's
there's
scary
another
in itself.
possibility as well, Royce. And really that is that not only can it be done insidiously like that, it can it can also be done in the name of protecting us from, other powers and our enemies, etc., because you can know where everybody is. But I think another likelihood is that, this could be made to be an attractive package that somebody might want to buy. If you can have all of your sports in your head at any time in any day, and you've got Google online and information and YouTube and Facebook, and you can communicate with all of your friends, and you have enough money, you might even sort of shell out to actually buy such a thing for yourself.
Yeah, and there's many people who would.
Yeah, and that's right, Royce. You make the point. I was on a radio interview recently where I was expounding this view, and the wife of my interviewer came in on this and said, well, why are you against all of this? If you can get all these powers through this technology, I'm going to buy into that for my children. And when I explained to her that the other end of this kind of technology would mean that maybe the husband would be so inculcated with all this kind of artificially molded stuff that commands his thinking, commands his movement, commands all of that, that he may never be able to look at her and call her beautiful again. And she was shocked. She jumped back and said, oh, no, I don't want that. She hadn't quite thought out the repercussions to the end. And when it actually affected her, she was really completely shocked by this. And, I think that's what happens to us. We think of all the positive sides, and we never really think that for every positive, there's an equal and opposite negative that might happen. And depending on what is good and bad, and who is good and bad, and who is in control who's good and bad, we are at the mercy of such things. And that's what politics is all about. That's what commercialism is all about. That's what buying and selling is all about. Absolutely. And so we go on, the same old rigmarole, and I think that we are so precious in what this incredible event that happened 2,000 years ago. I think Jesus was trying to show us 2,000 years on. Hang on a minute, busters. Watch this. Watch this space. And he showed us what space was all about. And the saddest thing of all is we took this wonderful being. We mangled his body. We crucified him. And all he ever did, it seems to me, from all the records I have read, was to care and love us. Now, that is a terrifying indictment, is it not, of our species?
Very. And I got to tell you that we had a question in the chat room as well. And Jennifer was wanting to know, what does he think about the experience that was taken in 1998 with the microchip implant, or the RFID, done on the British scientist Kevin Warwick?
Right. Yes, well, he's a great enthusiast about this. But then, when they get letters after their names, the vanity of scientists and the inertia of their minds to want to know doesn't make them wise.
Right.
That's the way I would answer that one.
Put it first.
I'm sorry about this, and I do apologize to Kevin Warwick. I'm sure he's a nice chap, but I know what it is like to work in a laboratory, and when you're on to something to chase it, you really have to stop and think what you're doing. And I, in my own personal life, I shall not quote that in public, but in my own personal life, almost did something that might have brought some terrible repercussions to human beings if I hadn't suddenly stopped and thought about what I was doing. So I know exactly how this thing proceeds where science is concerned. One has to think all the time, and I'm sorry, but there are individuals and individualizations that aren't as caring and loving as there are others, shall we say. And
true.
I think that science really has to look at that side of it. I mean, the word love these days is soft, isn't it? Isn't it funny? When something is beautiful and sweet, I think more and more in the Euro-Caucasian mind, I know particularly in Europe, and sad to say, I think a lot of that happens in my own country, Britain, I think they find it repellent. They find goodness repellent more and more, and that is a really scary proposition. And you can see that as time goes on, we seem to get harder and harder, don't we, wherever we look. People seem to be hardening up so much. Instead of seeing the lessons of the past, religion has falsified, I'm talking about organized religion, has falsified the beauty and statements and examples of the great authors of religion in such a way that that too is regarded as false and thrown out of the window, when in fact you have here examples like the Shroud shows, where an individual actually proved to us what he was saying was absolutely true. And you know, I was looking at this guy, Jesus Christ, and I thought to myself, here's a guy who proposes that when he goes into Jerusalem, not only he will be hailed to start with, but I tell you what, he told his apostles, you think that's going to be wonderful? Well, I'll tell you what, they will crucify me. They will do this, 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 and this to me. The moment I step into those gates, I am a dead man. And you know, if he was a con man, it's at the gates of Jerusalem that that con man would have run the other way, knowing full well what faced him when he went in through those gates. But Jesus Christ went in through those gates. He went in and he suffered all of that. And to me, a man who can do that has to be telling the truth.
Now, I was thinking about this thing a minute ago. You was talking about them selling this as a package. You know, I got to tell you from my own personal experience, 15 years in sales and management collections, we were actually trained that when you're working the sales floor, the big thing you focus on is features and benefits, and that you actually, like you said, downplay, if you even mention any negatives at all, try to only mention them if a customer asks, don't volunteer it, and, you know, keep the high side. So, yeah, you know, this is something that's done deliberately, in other words.
Well, look at what's happening to our smartphones at the moment. You know, I mean, there's all this big controversy about all of these smartphones containing extra little chips and extra little programs that record your every keystroke, and that the government, in fact, there was one case where the government actually said that they'd actually listened in through somebody's cell phone and the thing wasn't even switched on to the user. And so, you know, what you're selling, there's all these additional little packages that can be sort of shunted onto the back of it that you know nothing about.
And if you don't know what you're looking for, you never will know about it.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, and I think now you said that they had this technology going on right now. I know that they've been working with nanotechnology for, oh, goodness knows what, 30 years, maybe more. But, I mean, how long have they actually been starting to work on this, their idea about consciousness transfer, which, I'll be honest with you, I don't think they can do it. They may want to, but I don't see how they can actually grasp something out of a human being and put it into a machine when they don't even really accept that it's its origin. In other words, they want to believe it's a function of the brain. In other words,
yeah. You know what, Royce? You are wiser and cleverer than any scientist that I know, and I know quite a few of them. Oxford, Cambridge, you name it. I know of quite a few of them. Because you're absolutely right. Consciousness is not the property of force, as in atoms. Consciousness comes in from what was before the universe formed to the spaces between atoms. It's in our spaces between the atoms that make us up. And you cannot transfer that. What you can transfer is a kind of aerial construct to actually try to pick up information. And that is not the whole being. You're absolutely right. They will never, ever be able to do that. I wrote my first book, the Song of the Greys, and I stuck my neck out and I said, at the time they said that the shroud was a medieval forgery. I stuck my neck out and I said, I tell you what, in time, this shroud will be proved to be an absolute and genuine artifact of something absolutely wonderful that mankind will have to understand and learn. Well, with the latest research coming out about this particular thing, then sadly they're not allowing it for some reason to be tested again for its date, and that's another suspicious thing, really. Quite.
Yeah, I kind of thought that might.
Yeah, a lot of scientists are puzzled by this. A lot of scientists are puzzled by this fact. But here we have these atomic scientists actually doing research and finding that you'd have to let off the equivalent of atomic bombs in a small chamber in order to make this impression on this piece of cloth of this face of a man. An incredible thing, whilst we're talking about, and the reason I'm laboring the point about the shroud is quite simply, it's the only thing we have in existence on this earth in terms of physical evidence that points to a power that we might have ourselves when you correlate that to what the words that Jesus Christ used and described during his time as we see it. By the way, the Gospels are not just the whole truth. I've done a lot of research as a result of this UFO. The funny thing is the UFO business led me much more into trying to understand the real truth about humanity and human beings and our potential. And not the other way around, because I thought the UFO thing was an absolute myth. It was absolute nonsense. I started the whole thing with complete incredulity about it. But as I looked at it more and more, and I saw the verifications made by your astronauts, your pilots, men of great reputation, testifying hundreds and hundreds of times, don't think there is no evidence for it. There's huge amounts of evidence for it, but it's all carefully hidden. And the great mystery and the thing that really we should get to the bottom of is who is hiding it, why are they hiding it, and in any event, what are they hiding it for? What are they hiding all this stuff for? If in fact there are beings on this earth and they were goodly, wouldn't you expect them, out of a sense of benediction for mankind, to come and say, gather, fellas, let's get this thing sorted together. We have all this knowledge. Here we are. We will upgrade everything you've got. We'll give you 0-point energy, free energy, whatever. If they were kindly and loving and caring, that's what you would expect a benign proposition to do. No. Instead, they hide. They hide. Why are they hiding? Why are people being abducted? People being torn to pieces by experiences every day. There are polls conducted, and the best numbers I can get to is way over 3 million people in the United States alone have had terrible experiences of these creatures, the same type of creature, doing unspeakable operations on them, shattering their minds. Well, I think maybe that these people are unique, and they can't change these people. Instead of being disturbed, I think these people who are chosen for that to be done, really they are special. These creatures can't actually do what they want to them. But the population that they can do it to, they don't abduct, if you see what I'm trying to say, which means it may be, a salutary warning to the rest of us that we better watch out. And that's the kind of UFO thing. But as I say, it's tied in intimately with the great pronouncements of the great religious teachers too. And that's what surprised me, how the whole thing works together and gives us a proposition that explains everything to us.
Well, yeah, I was also going to mention from about, if you go back here a minute ago, what you were saying about the words of Jesus, and you were talking about how consciousness is in between spaces. During my reading of the Bible, I found a passage that would support that, but I don't remember where it is without looking up, and I don't have time to right now. But anybody can probably look it up. It's somewhere in Luke, if you want to do it after the show, for example.
I'll do that,
where he says the kingdom of God is inside and outside of you and around you. What he's referring to is the consciousness field that surrounds all things living are matter, in other words.
You are a very impressive chap, Royce. Can I tell you that? That is absolutely.
I just wanted to point out that Jesus taught that, in other words, because there's some people that don't realize it.
He said the kingdom of heaven is within you. And it's a puzzle to everybody. But if you see that as that point where the spaces between atoms have no force at their center points, and that's the peace of the angels, if you like. And it is where there is no force that what I call what was before the universe happened in this big blast that gave rise to force, that mixed in with that is a track with no force right in the center of it. And so, if you like, I call that the God verse. I don't like this idea of a man with a flowing beard touching Adam's finger being God. I think God is a principle, you know. I think it's much better seen as a principle, really, basically. And I think that principle pervades everything. And the point about it is that if you arrange atoms in a certain way, that principle kind of amplifies itself, and then life begins in systems where that arrangement allows the most of that previous stature, call it godlight if you like, coming through. That will live. That will be naturally living. When the explosion made atoms in an array that doesn't allow a lot of that light to come through, a certain degree of it, then it doesn't live. It becomes, you know, an inanimate object or whatever it is. And I think that those things that live are in fact able to mark that wonderful benefit through what we call consciousness, if you see what I'm trying to say. And anything that lives, therefore, has to be respected because it has a greater amount of this godlight coming through the arrangement of its atomic array and allowing greater spaces to come through. The crucial element, actually, in this would be hydrogen. And you know, we are mostly hydrogen because we're mostly water. And it's the simplest element. The simpler something is, the less complex it is, the more likely it is to be like that quiet nothingness that is full of knowledge. It's not nothing at all. It's full of knowledge and information, all information about the whole prescription of being, and any question you can answer and so forth is within the scope of this wonderful quiet light that I call God light, coming through the spaces between our atoms at the center points of them. And when we die, I think our information field releases itself into those spaces and stays as a shape within those spaces till another situation arises where it can learn more, and then you've got a new life beginning there. But that's a complex series of events, and I've had to write 3 books to try to explain it in a scientific way. I'm just giving you a nice folksy kind of description of it, I might say.
Well, yeah, but see, it's an important description, I think, in my opinion, and personally, the more simpler, the better, because not everybody likes to receive things in higher terms anyway. So, you know, you got a market for both.
Yeah, I mean, another way of looking at it is, I mean, suppose have you ever tried to unravel a pile of wires you put in a box? You know, if you or a piece of string, you know, if the thing is all raveled up and it's all twisted, you know, it'll take you an age to actually unravel it. Whereas if it's got just one simple little twist to it, you can very easily undo the thing. And I think this is the way sort of atoms are made, with increasing force and twistedness within them. And so if you're based on hydrogen, you really only got to undo, you know, one simple thing with your actions to be able to translate that atom into what it was before. In other words, the space between it. And I think that's a reasonable analogy for it.
Well, that would explain the reason why we started out with single-cell systems.
Yes, indeed. Indeed it would. And you are a remarkable chap. You know, I often think that in writing the kinds of things I have had to write, that one tends to go into obscurity in order to try and explain some rather complex ideas. And I try to keep it as simple as I can and find that extremely difficult to do. However, the most wonderful surprise I have had is that so many people, as soon as you give them that instigatory clue, they just pick it up and they see it. And through the centuries, what has been missing is that instigatory clue to give us all a chance to work it out for ourselves. Other people have told us what to think and how to think. That's the problem. And with the best intentions, some of them can mislead us.
Yeah, that's why I'm kind of leery about the public school system of today. I mean, they're teaching you what's actual fact, when in reality their actual facts turn out not to be actual facts when you're grown. I mean, they taught you things about history that when you go back and look through history, nowadays you find out that things weren't quite what they were taught when you were younger, and you got more than one. They taught that George Washington was the first president of our country, but if you go back and do more research, you'll find out they had several presidents before him, but he was the first one that was actually put up on the pedestal for all to see, you might say.
You bet. And I think that there's a chance for our world, and I'm not saying this to try to praise and butter up Americans, but I really believe that in many ways that sense of religious fervor that pervades most of America might give us a chance, in a sense, if used wisely, to still retain something that might give us all our independent facility to think. Unfortunately, with great power also comes great temptation. And we've seen that with the Soviet Union and what it has done to people and so forth, and all these other dictatorships around the world, and these terrorists fighting desperately for what they believe to be injustices and so forth. And we follow all of this, and before we know where we are, everyone is fighting some kind of war. And the beauty and glory of each natural human being is the last thing in the world that we seem to consider, Royce. And that, if you like, to me, I hope I don't sound too much like a preacher, but it really, in coming to understand all this business, which I came to incidentally, quite accidentally, through a question asked by my son, Dad, are UFOs real? I mean, I didn't know that 30 years on, that question changed the fundamental existential base on which I premised everything I ever believed in. And am I glad that little boy asked me that question, because he's a smart little honcho, and trying not to be made to be ridiculed by him with a flippant answer like, it's Buck Rogers, don't believe it, which is what I was tempted to say when he asked me the question, incidentally. I thought I'd take a rain check and have a look at this information and come back at him so he couldn't get me on the stand, so to speak. It has actually transformed my life. I have seen that there is a huge conspiracy hidden out there that is in some kind of way trying to control the human family. I'm not just saying any particular country. I'm talking about the whole human family. And that is something I think we all us mums and dads, have to really have a look at if we possibly got spare time to do that. Unfortunately, as you say, it's buying and selling, isn't it, really, basically? And if you can tell a few lies to get a few more dollars or whatever, that's encouraged. Unfortunately, at the end of that stipend might be the price of our eternity. And that's what worries me about what I've discovered.
Yeah, and there's another thing I would be leery of. To anybody out there that's thinking that they want to be proactive for transhumanism, you want to ask yourself, because you're not just talking about your children's future, and I got 3 kids myself, but you could be talking about your own future. I mean, are you robbing yourself of the ability to be reincarnated at all because you never left this realm in order to re-enter this realm? And what kind of future are you creating for yourself?
Absolutely.
And the next thing I'd want to mention, Nigel, is I tend to agree with you. Out of my 3 kids, I have to tell you, it seemed to me like the time they listened the closest to me is when they were listening for something to correct.
Oh, I tell you what, I think you've got more wisdom packed up in there somewhere than I could ever have in another 5,000 years. But I do my best, you know.
I don't know. I don't think I can keep up with you.
Say these things. That's wonderful. And you know, I mean, we discussed this over the media and whatever it is. I would love this to happen in every living room, but with a kind of independent sense, you know. Don't shout down a person when they have their own intuitive ideas. Just discuss it. This is what I've tried to encourage in my own family as we've gone along. And there's so much to learn about this. When you take the wraps off and say, look, that's not true. This is what this says, this book says, and that book says. Just think about it as rationally. And if it doesn't fit together, if 1 + 1 doesn't equal 1 + 1, then dismiss it. You know, just dismiss it. No matter who says it, dismiss it. Just try to work it out as folks, be as folksy as you can, but be as logical as you can about things. And you know, a whole new world starts up just there, then and there, it all starts up. And I think that that's the wonderful adventure I've been on in these last few years, transforming my life from a quiet enjoyment of the game. I don't suppose you guys know about cricket where you are. I hope you do.
I've heard of it.
That's wonderful. My goodness, that's a universal mind you've got there. But as somebody from the UK talking to you in America, and that's really the proper. Mike, that question was asked me when I was watching one of these games of cricket, and I tell you what, this whole thing has happened in a really strange and, as I say, folksy way. When my son asked me the question, Dad, are UFOs real? I tell you, I never in a million years thought that the Pandora's box that I was going to open had such interesting things inside it to reveal. And I'm glad that the little boy asked me that question. No, not a little boy. He's well in his 30s, but I tell you, that was a wonderful, wonderful moment for me, as it turned out. And I think it can happen all the time to people all over the world, if they but let it happen. And let's not dismiss the great teachers as I did. I mean, as far as I was concerned, all religions were just, if you like, as they used to say, the opium of the masses or whatever it is. But you know, if you really do the research into Christianity too and find the books that they threw out, not the ones that you see shown to you, there you will find the most amazing dissertations and values. It doesn't take away at all from goodness and caring and loving and those epithets of bringing things together rather than tearing them apart. And that's just a very simple way for me to say the difference between God and the devil, so to speak, you know. And I try and explain to a little kid of 5 or 6 years old that God is a sheet of paper whole and together, and the devil is quite simply that piece of paper torn in half, so to speak. You make it more complex. And you know, we've got a thing called the second law of thermodynamics in physics, which is the basic law of the universe, where things fall apart with time. That's why we all die. That's why everything rots, Royce. That's why we have no way of bringing things as continuity goes on. All things go into greater states of randomness and chaos with time. Believe it, that is true. That is what is happening. And even cosmologists and scientists have to acknowledge today that the universe, as we know it, with all its structures, will end with no structures one day, all unraveled into a huge field, something of cold nothingness and something of unimaginable hot nothingness, if you see what I'm trying to say. Now, if it is finite and it is not eternal, then, and God is eternal, or these ideas of God or godness is eternal, well, it must exist outside those two paradigms. And that's what I think this is all about, that there is another state of being outside our reality, where all things come together. And we have to access that state of coming together by thinking thoughts and doing actions that bring things together rather than tear them apart. And to me, that is the difference between good and evil, really, basically. And here I'm giving you a nice, folksy explanation that I give my children to get them off my back, so to speak.
Well, listen, Nigel, I was going to mention we got something like 10, 15 minutes left into the show, and I wanted to make sure before we got out of here that you and John got to cover everything you wanted to cover. Is there anything you want to throw out there that I didn't think to ask?
No, not at all. I mean, what's lovely about the things and discussions and things like this is that you take it where it goes naturally. You have too much of a prescription, and then you're in a mold, and you tend to lose what is true when that. Well, your search for truth tends to go rather askew, shall we say? And I've found, if as the great Christian teacher said, do not have a mind to plan what you say, just say it, because it will be your Father in heaven who will be doing the saying. And if the space between atoms is his voice coming through as God light, shall we say, this lovely, quiet N light, I call it. I love the word N light. Kind of, goes with enlightenment, shall we say,
Right.
And you know what I mean? So, if that is true, and you can see things so clearly then. That's the amazing thing. And if somebody told me this before I started to do it myself, I would have told them, you're out there with the fairies, mate. But I'll tell you what, it works.
Royce, we've been talking a lot about things like, electronics and actually getting into our electric fields and stuff to actually control us. But there's another thing that we do, which is actually quite scary too. Nigel has been talking about, the clear view one can have, unimpeded by these devices, etc., which can actually take you to another state of being. In that sort of way, to the soul, the reality is almost a virtual reality. It doesn't mean it's not going to impinge upon you. But the problem is that using these types of electronics and stuff we have now, we're inventing newer worlds that we can immerse ourselves in. And again, like raveling up the string, we're making things more and more complex. There are worlds on the internet now that people can go and live in. There is currency on these little worlds, etc. And so people are replacing what they consider the bad parts of the real world in terms of what they can get away with or what their potential is, in an electronic sort of fashion. And I think this further confuses the whole story, so that people can no longer know what is real that they can even attend to in their actual lives. And I think this is, another dangerous connotation that brings people closer to being part of a system such as that in the first place.
Yeah, you're talking about games, say, like perhaps Second Life.
Yeah.
They have these little lending coins, I think you call them. And, it's really kind of scary if you look at the fact that if people aren't careful, they could actually replace fantasy virtual reality with real reality and then lose all track of it. And I think some people are actually on a subconscious level doing this already.
Absolutely. So even without the electronics, how are people going to know what is the thing to actually do in their real lives, when they live in all of these other potential lives that they've created electronically?
The simple thing, Royce, is that there is this hedge, there's this urge to control. And some people find that so powerful. And of course, it's based on that stem of selfish vanity, if you see what I'm trying to say. All the things the great religious teachers try to tell us, but they really are commonsensical things that most people can work out in day-to-day life, in day's own troubles, so to speak. And really, that's what we have to watch. That by allowing these people to buy and sell and new technologies and what have you, the inertia of that will then get into us, the mechanisms, with our fragile physical bodies, of a takeover that will never allow us one day to see what we are and who we are. And that something else will be doing that. And if there are these space creatures coming in who are robots that are programmed, and they can hack into our information system, into our individual information field we call a soul, if they can put that information in there, then they interrupt our individuality forever. And we will be neither one thing or another. And that's the great thing that I fear most of all, is that if they take that away from us, each individual is gone forever. And that could be the true damnation. And you can see how easily a message on a mobile phone can be hacked.
Oh,
What
yeah.
if our own information can be hacked by these great technologies with their information field superimposed or piggybacked on our own individual one? Then our individual humanity would be lost forever. And I think that is what Jesus was trying to allude to. Do not let that happen. You know, in Judea, he was taken up a mountain by a character called Satan. Now, in order to take Jesus up the mountain, obviously, it would imply that Satan had power to do that. And Jesus was taken up this mountain and shown the cities of the world, so we are told in the account in the Gospels. And Satan then says to Jesus, if you fall down and worship me, I will give you all these cities of the world. Now, I've been to Judea, I've been to Jerusalem, and I recommend everyone goes there. It's a beautiful, beautiful city. There is no place high enough where you see the cities of the world from Jerusalem. But I tell you what, if you went 100 miles vertically up into space, you would see all the known cities 2,000 years ago, you might call the cities of the world. And the implication is quite clear that Jesus was in fact taken up in some kind of mechanism that could do that, at least 100 miles high vertically from the plains of Judea, or the high places of Judea, whatever they might be, and the point, or whatever the point might be. But the point was this. At the end of all of that, he turns to this character that's called Satan and says, "Get thee behind me, Satan, for it is written, thou shalt not tempt the Son of Man." And what he was trying to say is, hang on a minute, you are a robot. You do not know you are a robot. I am telling you that because robots don't know what they are themselves, if you see what I'm trying to say. You are, in fact, he was saying you are less than an insect, if you see what I'm trying to say. In the property of existentiality, it was that entity, no matter how advanced he might be as a robot, coming from wherever in space or whatever, he was still not a living being with a connection to the beginning of the universe, as we have, as these paltry beings, that inhabited Judea 2,000 years ago. And I believe that's a very powerful pointer to the fact that Christ, in fact, knew and understood the phenomenon of extraterrestrials coming to our planet. And perhaps even the whole story about it is of him coming to warn humanity in the future that they will have to face this proposition, or perhaps lose the most precious thing of all, their
humanity,
incredible propensity for eternal life.
Okay. Now, before we get out of here, I wanted to also mention that if you want to learn more about Nigel, his website is www.nigelkerner, NigelKerner.com, and he has articles and links to articles and stuff at that site where you can learn more. And I also wanted to find out if John has because I went to his school website. Does he have an actual website of his own that he can share with the listeners?
No, I don't at the moment, but I'm actually preparing to put one up there based on this type of work.
Well, if you'll stay up in touch with me and let me have that information, I'll make sure it gets passed around. Is he still there? Nigel, are you still there?
Hello. Can you hear me? Hello?
Okay, yeah, I can now. I didn't hear you for a minute there. I thought I lost you.
Yes. Unfortunately, that's what my wife was hoping for, but I come back 40 years and I'm still here with her.
But,
she often says that, "Oh, where are you? Have I lost you?" Unfortunately, I'm still here.
Okay, well, I just wanted to make sure I got quiet for a minute But yeah, if, John will let me know when he gets that that URL. They'll send it to me. I'll make sure it gets passed around. I like to make sure everybody gets this here information because, like I said earlier, it's very important information. Your future, your children's future, all depends upon decisions that are made, votes that are made, etc. You know, if you're going to go into something, you really ought to think it all the way through instead of just listening to the parts you want to hear and saying it sounds good, let's go with it, and let it bite you in the hiney later.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you very much for the privilege of talking to you, Royce. It's been really enjoyable.
I want to thank you, Nigel, and I hope to have you come back in the future, you and John both.
I'd love to.
Okay,
If you aren't
Yes,
already
sir.
bored completely.
Do what now?
Well, all the best to you. Thank you very much.
you.
Yeah, all the best to you, Royce.
All right. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Yeah. Bye-bye.